As we're winding down with our content for this timeline, something we need to talk about are the transitions and how we can make this sequence more fluid. Because in any particular video that you've created in the past, I'm sure you've noted that having a transition allows the fluidity to happen within a video. But what's more concerning with 360 video is how absolutely jarring and disorienting you can cause your audience to feel if you don't have the proper transitions. This is a bit of a problem not only with 360-degree video, but also 3D video when it first came out years ago. So let's avoid that altogether by, first of all, adding transitions, and then secondly, knowing how to do it properly so you don't make your viewers sick. So if I were to ask you right off the bat, how would you add transitions into this video? You might say, well, John, I'm just going to click on any edit point inside this video, and I'm just going to use my shortcut key to add the transition. On my keyboard, it's Command-T, or on a PC, it would be Control-T, T for transition. And just to make sure the icon also comes in with a transition, I'll add a transition to that one as well. So I'll just click on right where the Pluralsight icon starts at the edit point, and then I'll Command-T it to add the transition. Now, in theory, that makes sense, but let's play that back for a second and see exactly what that looks like. So, two issues that I see right off the bat. The first is it's disorienting. And by that I mean there's too much change happening too quickly. And that might not look like a big deal to you right now when you're watching it on the screen, but imagine having a VR headset on right now, watching that. In fact, you're in the middle of turning your head 180 degrees, and all of a sudden the image changes. It happens so quickly that it could very well disorient you, make you feel dizzy, or even nauseous. So that's the first issue. The second one is we need to clean up how these transitions are happening. Because as you can see, we have the Pluralsight icon, which is a part of the Branko's Bridge scene. So let's start by actually nesting those two clips together and making them one single clip. That way, we can fix the transition issue in one fell swoop. So I'll start by selecting the Branko's Bridge and the Pluralsight icon scene right there. I'll do that by clicking anywhere in the sequence and just dragging my mouse to select them both. I'll right-click, come down to Nest, and here I can name the nest. We'll call it Branko's Bridge Nested. And two become one. Perfect. That's step one. Step two is let's take this nested clip, which contains both of those clips, and let's put it about 2 seconds, maybe a second and a half, on top of this previous shot. And the reason why is because we're going to generate a manual cross dissolve instead of the Premiere Pro generated ones. And again, we're doing this because it's going to allow us to create a smoother in and out point within the transition. What I'm going to do next is come to my media bin, and I'm going to create a new item by right-clicking in here, go to New Item, and the new item is going to be an adjustment layer. So I'll give it a click. All looks good. I'll hit OK. And let's add this adjustment layer right above, you guessed it, the Branko's Bridge nested sequence. So why are we adding an adjustment layer? Well, this adjustment layer is going to contain a blur. And not just any blur, because as we've seen before, adding the normal blur from Premiere may or may not cause stitching. So instead, we'll be using the Skybox plugin blur, which allows us to work with the blur inside of 360 Space. But before I do that, I'm simply going to keyframe this clip here, Branko's Bridge, so that the opacity comes in from 0 to 100 in about a second and a half. And I can easily do that by coming into the effects control panel, and I'll be using the opacity option. So I'm going to click this little toggle switch right here to open up the opacity. I'm going to move my playhead to the beginning of the Branko's Bridge clip, and I'm simply going to create the keyframe by making sure this little clock here next to the word opacity is pressed, which it is. So now any change I make is going to create a keyframe in time telling Premiere, hey, at this point, keep it at this opacity. And that opacity will be 0. Then I'll move my playhead to right where the summer resort shot ends. And then I'm going to come back to the opacity and move it up to 100. Notice when I do this, how that line inside the Branko's Bridge is revving up to 100, which is telling us that within the 5 to 6 second mark, this clip will go from 0 opacity, invisible, to suddenly fading into 100 within a second or a second and a half. That's step 2. And in fact, that might be a little short, so I will come in here a little, drag both clips forward some, and extend the second keyframe, the 100% keyframe, so that we get more of a 2-second transition instead of 1. And here's a general rule of thumb for 360 video. When it comes to transitions, the longer the better. And typically that's not the case with normal video, but again, we're trying not to disorient the crowd. Okay, so let's select the adjustment layer for step 3, and I'm going to bring up the effects panel with the arrow, effects, metal, and let's go with the Skybox blur. I'll drag it on top of the adjustment layer, and inside the effects controls in the top left, I now have the effect active. And here's the goal. I'm going to set this so that the blurriness ramps up with the clip, Branko's Bridge, only to 50%. And then I'm going to ramp it back down. And what that will do is as the Branko's Bridge begins to come in, the adjustment layer will also add a 360-degree safe blur that also comes in and then slowly tones down once the Branko's Bridge has been fully realized. So just like the opacity from before, we're going to add keyframes to this blurriness on the adjustment layer. And I'll do that by clicking the little clock here next to the word blurriness. I'm going to set my playhead, and I'll do the 50% one first. So I'll set it here, go to 50, and then I'm going to go to the beginning of the clip, the adjustment layer clip, and I'm going to move that to 0. And you're probably wondering why we can't see that. Well, it's because we don't have the keyframes turned on within the sequence. So I'll go ahead and activate them by right-clicking on the adjustment layer, go to Show Clip Keyframes, Skybox Blur has its own set of keyframes, and go to Blurriness. Now we can see those keyframes, and notice how they work in tandem with the Branko's Bridge clip. And now I'm going to play this back, but I'll need to render it. So give me just a second here. I'm going to set the in point and out point on this sequence, and then I'm going to render. All right, so now that we're finished rendering, let's check out what we got. Now notice the fluidity and the smoothness of that. And that's mainly because the adjustment layer above the Branko's Bridge is giving the viewer a bit of a heads up. Like, hey, something's about to happen. The world is changing. It's giving the viewer some time to adjust the opticals before they get sick. And that's the main goal that we've just accomplished. And so what I would advise for the rest of this sequence is to go through to the next clip. And remember, this one has 3 layers of content: the Pluralsight logo, the sample 3D text, and then of course the base clip syntagma square. And I would nest those as well, so then you can continue doing the same thing we just did with the Branko's Bridge clip. And here's a trick. If you want to just copy the same settings over, all we have to do is Option click or Alt click on a PC, the adjustment layer on top of Branko's Bridge. That creates a duplicate copy of the adjustment layer, and you can place that right onto syntagma square. And then as for the keyframes, you can just click on Branko's Bridge and then Command C to copy, Control C on a PC. Go to the syntagma square and you'll want to right click, paste attributes. From here, we can paste the opacity or the keyframes we added, just like Branko's Bridge. Click OK, and now those keyframes that go from 0 to 100 opacity within 2 seconds automatically gets pasted in there. So now we have the same effect on 2 different clips, allowing our viewer to have a much better 360 viewing experience without losing their lunch.